many people have heard over and over, time and time again, that WikiLeaks caused harm to sources, that they've heard that they intended to cause harm to sources, that they didn't care if people were hurt. Your testimony suggests something much different was going on with WikiLeaks.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, we have to start with a fact. And the fact is, in the last 10 years, the US government has tried to argue that WikiLeaks put people, sources in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in authoritarian countries from Iran to China and other authoritarian countries. They put people at risk, and they put people at risk in Afghanistan. They put local Afghani people who had cooperated with US troops and coalition troops at risk. But 10 years later, they cannot find a single example of a person, of an Afghani person, an Afghan person, an Iraq person, or whatever, who was put at risk. They cannot provide an example of a person who was killed, who was arrested, who was tortured. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So I can imagine that if they had just an example, it would have been worldwide exclusive, run by the most important media in the world, and they were it would have been hell. But we haven't seen anything. They basically were discussing these risks at the hearing, and they were unable to provide a single example. So, I mean, you have to realize how absurd, how unbearable situation is this, because we have spent the last 10 years discussing the victims that never were, and whereas we have discussed little the real victims, the hundreds of thousands of people killed by the US troops, by the coalition troops, and even the victims by the Taliban and the insurgent and so on. So we have spent 10 years discussing the deaths that never were, while not discussing the real victims. And this gives you a measure of how we live in a world of propaganda when it comes to WikiLeaks. We have spent 10 years discussing the victims that never were. This gives you a measure of how perverse is this debate about WikiLeaks and the WikiLeaks revelation. Anyway, let me go back from the very beginning when I started working with WikiLeaks as a media partner. The first time was 2009. They had they hadn't published the collateral murder or even the Afghan war logs. They were known to few people and so on. So from the very beginning, I was really impressed because they were getting these files from all around the world. Back in 2009, they were getting files about Guantanamo and about Trafigura and about other things, and about the Swiss bank Julius Baer. And they were trying to verify the documents and to make sense of these complex documents. So from the very beginning, I was really impressed by the way they were working on the files. And back in back in September 2010, when I met Julian in Berlin and his baggage had disappeared from during the flight, I was impressed once again because he asked me such complex handling, such hard security measure that I never heard of it. Not even colleagues working on very dangerous mafia bosses use that kind of protection. He asked me to use encrypted computers, air-gapped computers, never went online. They asked me never to discuss the files via email, never to discuss the files via phones, only using encrypted communications, only using encrypted laptops, never leave the computer unattended. So it was it was so tricky to handle, to take these measures seriously. I know that some journalists were really irritated. Some international journalists didn't want to deal with such complexity, with this encryption, which in this day in these days is maybe more friendly, but at that time it was much harder. So they didn't want to comply with these complex rules. They didn't want to bring the computer so always with them, as I have done for the last 10 years. They didn't want to use this complex technology. And it was the first time that I work in this condition. So when I hear people saying that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks didn't handle things properly, for me it was the first time I heard about such strict security procedures. And I heard other international colleagues, investigative journalists, who told me the very same. This was the first time for us. Never before anyone had asked such serious security measures. And I remember very well from the very beginning when in September 2000, when in September 2010, when we met for the first time for the Afghan warlords, he explained me how to manage passwords, and he explained never publish the passwords. So when, for example, the Guardian published the passwords for the cables, which basically at the end of the day caused the cables being released without any reduction, I wondered, did these people understood? Did these people understand what they were supposed to do? Because he explained me that from the very beginning. So how they got so wrong that they published the password. And they published the password, and at that point, of course, the cables were released unredacted, all at once unredacted. But it happened because they got things so wrong about the password, and I still wonder why they got that so wrong. Because Julian and the staff had explained us how to manage the passwords, had never published them. Never, even after many years after you have used the password, you should not provide the password to anyone. You should not publish the password, never ever, because you are not supposed to provide intelligence. You are not supposed to provide an insight to people who want to attack you. So it was so strict, the procedure. And I take these procedures very seriously. I wonder why other colleagues were not taking them seriously, because it was amazing how they had organized the full work with such complexity and such detailed procedure for the first time in our lives, never before. You have to realize that in those days, no newsroom, no, not even the New York Times, the Washington Post were using encryption systematically as WikiLeaks did. And that's why I contacted them back in 2008, 2009, when I wanted to learn how to use encryption to protect sources and to protect documents, because I knew that they were the first media organization doing this pioneering work. So everything was properly done, everything was properly organized. Of course, it was tough, it was difficult, and it was irritating, because you had to deal with these complex procedures. And that's why many people did not respect it. Many people were just annoyed told by WikiLeaks that they should use encryption all the time, that they should not leave computers unattended, which is, of course, a nightmare. But we did it. I did it. I respected these rules, and I'm happy to have learned to this kind of procedures because I have been using them for the last 10 years. So I'm happy they trained me to do this, and everything was properly done. So it's completely false that they just dump stuff on the internet because we worked so hard to redact cables. I remember I was contacting them around the clock to ask to remove the names of people at risk. And it was hard work, and it was amazing how I had been organized. So whenever I hear that, or they were just dumping stuff on the internet, putting people at risk, I get mad because I know what the kind of work behind this publication, and I know how intelligent, how smart it was, the whole procedure.
Encryption to me is also a part of what made WikiLeaks so
So
important. There's talk about the publication strategy, the way that they published documents in their entirety for the world to read, along with any media reports that were published covering the materials. So now the public could see the source material for these reports. And that was a new development in journalism. Not that they were necessarily the first to ever try something like that, but to popularize it. And then you had the encryption. And those are things that I think we take for granted now because it's become a standard at numerous outlets. And of course, we heard evidence that there are many news organizations that even have leaks submissions now, which is something that didn't exist at all when WikiLeaks was around in when they first came onto the scene in the late 2000s. And so, that's one aspect I'm really glad that you're able to speak to. Another thing I would ask for your opinion on is the way in which the entire institution of asylum has been shown contempt by the United Kingdom. There's been a little bit of contempt shown by Sweden, as well as now currently with the current Ecuador government, but most significantly the U.S. government in this case that continues to maintain that Julian Assange was in the embassy as a fugitive from justice, which is essentially what the United Kingdom has adopted as their idea. As someone who is in Europe and uh, you know does a better job of claiming to believe in and in upholding international law than I think my country does. We just don't really seem to think that any sort of international legal principles should be submitted to. I'd like your reaction to the way in which there is this approach by these prosecutors that Julian Assange was not supposed to be in some form of safety, that in fact he was fleeing accountability. And the new thing is to say that he shouldn't have had his children and he shouldn't have formed a relationship with his fiancee Stella Morris because he knew he was going to be in trouble by the US government. They said that his family was built on foundations of sand, which I think is very crude. And I find it to be despicable the way in which they characterize this trying to build a family so that he could have something to look forward to in his future. And they act like this is some way of using them as pawns against the United States government to help him gain some kind of an edge over them. Everything with the U.S. government is that Julian Assange is trying to outsmart them in some way because they really do see him as like a spy and not a journalist, or they want to treat him like a hacker who's sophisticated in his abilities and not a journalist. And so, what are your thoughts on what it means when we look at this case, the way they have approached the fact that he has political asylum or had political asylum and it was stripped away from him entirely?
Yes, I mean, you have to realize that the whole case is about how you publish extremely uh, dangerous, extremely risky content, extremely dangerous documents, exposing the highest level of power, and you get some place to hide. The whole case is about this because he tried all sorts of protections. He tried all sorts of place to try to not to hide but to protect himself. He initially tried to go to Sweden because he knew that Sweden has good laws when it comes to freedom of information, and he ended up in this very, very weird investigation, very, very weird. And I have spent 5 years trying to get the documents. Still, I'm unable to get the documents about the Swedish case, and I will tell you why it's so weird. So he tried to go there and try to get protection from this country, which is famous for his laws, from his freedom of information, and he got nothing. He ended up in this investigation. Then he tried to get asylum, and again it didn't work. He came out as a kind of prison, and he never got safe passage, which usually people who get asylum do, and now he's in prison. So the whole Julian Assange WikiLeaks case is about how a journalist can publish uncompromising truth. How can a journalist publish very dangerous content, exposing people who are above the law, like the CIA? We have seen that they have above the law. They never have spent a single day in prison for basically kidnapping a person in the heart of Milan, as if this person was in a Pinochet trial, and they never spent a single day in prison, even if they had a final sentence. They never spent a single day in prison for torture after the 9/11, for torturing people. And we know that the only CIA agent who ended up in prison is John Kiriakou, who did not torture anyone and who publicly exposed the tortures publicly. So these people are completely above the law. There is no accountability, no justice. And these organizations who expose them systematically, because usually other media organization, other journalistic organization, they probably publish some documents, they probably expose them on certain kind of operation, but WikiLeaks has done this systematically for the last 10 years. So the whole case is about how can you do this work of exposing these people who have above the law, and you get it protection for this. And still we don't have an answer, because if we look at the Julian Assange case, we don't have there is no such protection. That's what we learned. And he tried all sorts of techniques or all sorts of strategies. He's a strategic person. He always thinks strategically. So he tried all sorts of solution, nothing worked. And this is disquieting, because at the end of the day, you draw the conclusion that there is no place to get protection. And if you want to get protection, you have to leave your country, as basically as Edward Snowden did, and you have to you have to go to Russia or maybe China. And this is very, very upsetting for me, because I don't want that in order to expose the CIA or the NSA or the Pentagon and their crimes, you have to escape to Russia or China. I want a society where you are free to do so and you are safe. I don't want that you have to go to leave your country, or you have to spend 8 years in prison, as Chelsea Manning did, trying to commit suicide 3 times, or spend 10 years confined, as Julian Assange has done since 2010. So this whole case is about this crucial thing, and we have to find a solution, because if we don't find a solution, it's incredible. There is no freedom of information if you are unable to expose these people, and you have no protection, and you have to destroy your life, because they put you in prison, or they chase you to the end of the earth, or they destroyed your freedom and health, like in the case of Julian Assange. So the whole case is about this. And he tried all sorts of things in order to get protection. He tried asylum, and he tried going to Sweden. He even tried with the UN, which at the end of the day is the only institution which has provided help at the end of the day, because we know that only thanks to the UN it was possible to establish that Julian Assange has been arbitrarily detained since 2010 by Sweden and the UK. And the UK was very unhappy about this, and they tried to appeal the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention decision, and they lost the case. And we know that Sweden was really unhappy, because it was the first time that Sweden was found detaining arbitrarily an individual, but they didn't appeal, and the UK appealed but lost the case. So we are basically left just with the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, and the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Niels Melzer, who basically established that he has been tortured psychologically from the very beginning, and that's the only institution which has tried to protect him at all, because as for the rest, no other institution has tried to do anything at all. And the UK authorities have behaved in an appalling way. They have denied a safe passage, and they have basically helped to create this quagmire, because it was the UK Crown Prosecution Service which told to the Swedish prosecutors not to go to London to question Julian Assange about the Swedish case. And in this way, they created this legal and judicial paralysis in the case, which basically has kept Julian Assange arbitrarily detained since 2010. So the UK authorities has huge responsibilities in this case, and it's appalling that the UK media, have done absolutely nothing to expose the responsibility. Quite the opposite. They have helped them. They never tried to apply for a freedom of information request to discover how the UK Crown Prosecution Service put pressure on the Swedish prosecutors, which was incredible, because it was a real mystery. No one could understand why the Swedish prosecutor could not go to London to question Julian Assange and to decide whether to charge him or whether to drop the investigation once and for all. And all journalists all around the world were were asking themselves why they don't go there, why they don't want to go there. It takes just 2 hours flight. I mean, why not? And it took an Italian journalist, which is pretty incredible, to discover why. It took an Italian journalist to file a freedom of information request in Sweden, UK, US, Australia, and to discover that basically it was the Crown Prosecution Service putting pressure on, telling the Swedish prosecutor, don't come here, question him only after extraditing him, which is the reason why this paralysis, still legal and diplomatic paralysis, developed. It's due to this pressure it's due to this advice by the Crown Prosecution Service. And no journalist tried to discover this. No journalist tried to even try to ask. Maybe you don't get the documents. I have been fighting for the last 5 years. It's really hard, really difficult. But at least they could have tried. They didn't. They never tried. And this agency, these UK authorities, the Crown Prosecution Service, is the very same agency which is in charge of the US extradition. So it's the very same agency. And this is the very same agency which basically destroyed the documents, crucial documents about the case. And so it definitely deserves scrutiny. It's crucial to investigate on how they behave and why they destroyed the documents and what those documents contained and why they are willing to extradite a publisher who basically expose crucial information in the public interest, expose war crimes, expose torture, extrajudicial killings by drones, why they are willing to extradite a publisher who has revealed such important information as if he was a drug dealer or a mafia guy. Why they are so willing to do so? I mean, this should be investigated, and this is why I have been working hard on my freedom of information litigation. And I have done this because no one did it. So, I mean, I realized that no one was doing this kind of work, which was pretty incredible to me, because dozens and dozens of people were reporting on the case, but none of them was trying to investigate the case, actually getting us access to factual information.
The possibility here is that the UK government might say that people who are not from the UK should not have the ability to make freedom of information requests, which would be really extraordinary. Am I correct?
So this is another case, because I have two freedom of information requests. Basically, I have two litigations which run in parallel. One is about Julian Assange. And in that case, I have been litigating the case in Sweden, UK, US, Australia, and I have spent 5 years just trying to get access to the documents. And when I started discovering crucial information, like the legal advice by the Crown Prosecution Service to the Swedish prosecutor, don't come here to question Julian Assange, which is the reason why he has spent 10 years in London in such paralysis, because they refused to go there to question. And so when I started discovering this crucial information, they destroyed the documents. And I don't know why why they did so. They try to stop me. They try to they made my life very, very difficult. And of course, when your life is very difficult, you have to invest a lot of money in legal fees, because you go on for years and years and so on. So in parallel to this Freedom of Information Act litigation, I have another one about three journalists Sarah Harrison, Joseph Farrell, and Christine Rafson. In that case, my lawyers were so good that we won against Scotland Yard. So we immediately won the case. But even if we won, they refused to provide the documents. They said, we had correspondence with the US authorities, but we won't provide you, even if we won the case. So I appealed because they refused to provide the documents. And now they say you don't have the right to appeal because you are not a UK journalist, and this is an extraterritorial request. So now my lawyers and I are fighting because we are saying never before they used this argument. From the very beginning, the UK Freedom of Information Act was about journalists all around the world asking for documents and getting access and litigating their freedom of information. And now you want to stop foreign journalists or even UK journalists, which are basically temporarily out of the British territories, to apply for a freedom of information request or to litigate a freedom of information request. On which kind of legal basis? You have no legal basis. So this unprecedented development, because never before they used this kind of legal argument that if you are a foreign journalist or if you are a journalist who is British journalist, but you are temporarily out of the British soil, you are not the right to litigate a freedom of information request. For the first time, never before they used this. And now we are fighting this because we believe it's completely unprecedented. And it's unbelievable that they use this argument. And this is about my freedom of information request on Sarah Harrison, Joseph Farrell, and Christine Rafson. And I'm fighting against Scotland Yard. And I had won, and my lawyers were so good that we won from the very beginning. But they have spent the last year denying us the documents. They said, we have the documents you requested. We had correspondence with the US authorities on these three journalists. They even called Scotland Yard, even acknowledged that they are journalists, but we won't provide it. So they are trying all sorts of legal tricks to deny me access to these documents, which means these documents are important. And I think they are important for one reason, because these people don't realize that basically there is no blanket exemption. So they probably write down their things. And when journalists ask for these documents, they realize that the documents contain embarrassing or evidence of meddling and so on. And so probably they don't want to release these documents for this reason, because the documents do contain important information, like in the case of Julian Assange, which basically the freedom of information request allowed me to reveal how the UK authorities had told the Swedish authorities, don't come here to question him. And you wonder why, what kind of interest they had in this Swedish case. If it was just a rape case, if it was just a sex case in Sweden, what was the UK interest in telling the Swedish prosecutor, don't come here, don't question him in London, just extradite him? It's very weird that they told the Swedish prosecutors, because even the Swedish prosecutors, you have to realize that thanks to my documents, it was possible to establish that back in 2013, the Swedish prosecutors were considering to drop the Swedish case, and the Crown Prosecution Service told them, don't do it. So the Swedish prosecutors got this message, this email from the UK Crown Prosecution Service. Don't you get cold feet. Again, what kind of interest they had, the UK authorities had in this case? Because in 2013, the Swedish prosecutors were considering to drop the investigation once and for all. So why the UK authorities told them don't do it? So don't you get cold feet, you know? So probably the documents contain very important information. That's why they don't want to release me the documents, even if I'm fighting this legal battle since 2015. And they destroyed the documents. And when we ask why you destroyed the documents, what the documents contain, they said, we don't know what they contained, which is unbelievable. I don't believe that they don't know, they didn't know what the document contained. I mean, if it's true, they are very weird people. They destroy documents and they don't have any idea what the document contains. It's not credible, you know?
So people do know who these individuals are. I'll just quickly mention that Kristen is the current editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks who stepped in for Julian. And then Sarah Harrison's actually an unnamed co-conspirator in the most and latest indictment against Assange. And then Joseph is an associate at WikiLeaks who's been involved in work on their publications and representing them. So,
and Kevin, these people have been there from the very beginning. So when people tell you, well, Julian was abandoned by his by the WikiLeaks people. No, these people have been there from the very beginning, and they're still there. I mean, they are there from the very beginning, and they of course work hard. I mean, Sarah Harrison. Thanks to Sarah Harrison, it was possible to save Edward Snowden. Otherwise, he would be in a supermax prison, and it would have been destroyed by the US authorities, because there is no doubt that they want to crush him. So she deserves a huge credit for what she did, because all other journalists just didn't do anything to help, to help Edward Snowden.
let's get to the last thing that I have here for us to address, which is the fact that Julian Assange is even in a prison during the extradition proceedings. This is something that has led to a lot of duress and stress for Julian Assange. And he's been in a prison at the Belmarsh High Security Prison during the COVID-19 pandemic. And yet, there has been at no point when the attorneys for him have been able to convince the judge that there are abuses of his human rights unfolding that would warrant his release to home confinement, at least, so that he wouldn't have to live under these conditions. We have recent developments that you can speak to about what the temperature is like in the facility, what he is enduring. I'll just quickly note that the last couple of months have been absolutely intense for him. Not only is he dealing with the anxiety of what the outcome may be with the extradition, the anxiety of what it means that the next president isn't going to be Donald Trump. And what will that mean? Does that mean that I might be able to have freedom, or does that mean the new administration is going to be exactly the same in their efforts to try and prosecute me? But he's had a friend who committed suicide in the prison, who was trying to avoid deportation back to Jair Bolsonaro's Brazil, because he feared that he would go through discrimination since he was a gay man. And so Julian Assange has gone through that, the COVID-19 outbreak, and then now, of course, we are in winter and it is getting colder and colder. And so, why don't we conclude here by your thoughts on this current status of the case and what Julian Assange has had to survive when it comes to being in a prison and not being outside of detention in order to defend himself appropriately during this extradition case?
Well, my thoughts are that we absolutely have to win this case, Kevin. We cannot afford to lose it for him as a human being, but also for journalism, because if we lose the case, it means that you cannot publish, you cannot reveal war crimes, you cannot reveal torture, you cannot reveal extrajudicial killings by drones, and you can be safe. So this case is absolutely crucial, as the Pentagon Papers was. I mean, it's something. It is unless you are free to publish crucial documents and to do it safely, you don't have freedom of the press in a democracy. So it's absolutely crucial we win this case as journalists. It is absolutely crucial we win this case for him as a human being, because what I have seen in the last 10 years, it's really troubling. It's really scary to me. I mean, I have seen these men trying to get some kind of protection just for doing serious journalism, which has empowered a newsroom and has empowered local communities and people like Abu Hamara, people like people who had been subjected to extraordinary rendition, and the Chagos Highlands people who are trying to get back to their highlands and that are using the WikiLeaks cables. So these publications have hugely empowered people. It's not like other publication which basically got massive scoops but nothing else, because if you don't publish the documents as WikiLeaks does, you just have the scoop. You have the scoops, but you don't have a follow up. Whereas in the case of WikiLeaks, we have seen how these documents 10 years later, or 5 years later, 7 years later, they are still used by newsroom, by journalists who access the cables, access the Afghan war logs, Iraq war logs. And if you remember when Khashoggi was killed, the Saudi Arabian dissident was killed in an horrific way by the Saudi regime, one of the first things that the Washington Post did was to get access to the WikiLeaks documents, specifically the hacking team documents, the hacking team emails, and they were able to get information about Saudi Arabia surveillance technologies. And that was just because WikiLeaks had made these documents public, because if they had just published some stories, as usually newspapers do, no one could have accessed these documents 5 years later, 10 years later. So it's very crucial to have these documents in the public domain. So they have done an incredible work. And this work was done thanks to the highly intelligent work of Julian Assange and the courage of Julian Assange and all the WikiLeaks staff and journalists and people like Sarah Harrison and people like all the people around Julian Assange and so on. And, we cannot afford that he end in a supermax prison. We cannot afford that he get COVID inside the Belmarsh prison, because they are keeping him in prison, even if he has never committed a violent crime. So what's the purpose of keeping him in prison? Because they could have found another solution, So it's this treatment is something which made me very, very worried, and has made me very unhappy about what I have seen about the propaganda war against Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, about the whole lies, about the manipulations I have seen, like they have bloods in their hands when in fact no one died, no one was ever injured, no one ended up in prison, and so on. And all these lies about the Russian stories, the Russian useful idiots, and so on. So I have seen this campaign in order to demonize Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And I'm very unhappy because they have basically this massive campaign has seriously undermined the reputation. And there is, at the end of the day, you need this public opinion support, and this campaign has hugely undermined this public support. And so when I look at my case, in which I was able to publish all these documents safely, and no one tried to arrest me, no one tried to put me in prison, and I compare my situation with the situation of Julian Assange, I'm absolutely unhappy about this. I feel the duty I have to speak out and use my safe position in order to get Julian Assange out of the prison and in order to get Julian Assange free, because it's unacceptable that a man who has revealed 15,000 civil deaths in Iraq, he has allowed to reveal crucial information like this, and he has never known freedom again. You cannot accept he has paid such a huge price. You should not be this way. Should not be that if you do these kind of things, if you reveal this kind of information, you are put in prison like Chelsea Manning, or you are put in prison like Julian Assange, or you have to escape to Russia. I cannot accept it. I think I want to use my journalistic work to change this, because it cannot be tolerated. I want a society where you are free to reveal war crimes and torture, and you are free as the air, as the CIA people are. They are the criminals. These people are the criminals. So it's the criminals who should go to prison, not the journalists who reveal their crimes. So, I mean, we are in a upside down world. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to realize this, that the people who commit war crimes are free as the air, and the journalists and journalistic sources who expose these war crimes are in prison. This is an upside down world. I cannot accept this, and I want to absolutely to change it with my journalism. And I believe any decent human being, any decent journalist should do it.
That's absolutely right. I think that's a great way to conclude the interview. Any decent journalist should be doing what you're doing. I fully support you, and I think there's just so little solidarity out there between journalists in support of Assange, and but there are a small group that are out there raising an alarm, and I think the future is going to show that we were all correct to say something and to bring this the attention that it needed. So with that, I say we don't know what is going to happen with Assange as far as a pardon goes, but also in how the judge rules on the extradition requests. Um, uh, I have negative feelings, but we just do not know. So we'll allow for the possibility that something good could come for Assange in this case. And I'll say that I'd like to talk with you in 2021 about the latest developments in this case, assuming that it progresses, assuming that but also with the outcome. I mean, if for some reason we overcome this case and he does get to walk free, you're going to be an important voice to talk to about how he finally won his freedom. So thank you for joining me and talking
Thanks to
about
you, Kevin. And let's open a presidential pardon for all of them, for Edward Snowden, for Chelsea Manning. Oh, sorry, for Chelsea Manning. Fortunately, we got it. For Julian Assange and for reality winner as well. So let's hope for in a presidential pardon.
Yeah, we need an end to this war on whistleblowers. It is very vicious, and I
Absolutely.
think sends a signal to other countries. No, not just the ones like Iran or China or Russia, who are official enemies of the United States, but every country in between, in Europe as well, that seems to think that then that might be okay for them to abandon their duties to uphold human rights. And if the United States is doing it, then it tends to be a green light for other countries to
Absolutely.
take it easy and cut corners, simply because of the way the United States holds itself out as a leader. And if they're not going to take these things seriously, other countries, especially the UK, Sweden, all the ones that have persecuted Julian Assange, they just say
Absolutely.
they're not going.
Absolutely. They will say, you can't afford to tell us what to do considering what you have done, you know.
All right. We'll catch up with you in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thanks so much.